When I recently answered questions, the questions that you had sent in, I mentioned that I might do a book review edition, and I got a very positive response to that, with people sending in to say they would like me to do this. So, as I'm very much led by my audience, this is in response, and thank you for asking for it. And we'll see how this goes and whether you're interested. But today I'll do 5 books that I think are really very important, enjoyable, interesting, and that I have read and reread over the years. I'm going to start with the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. You can see it says a new edition. You can also see this new edition is rather battered. I've used it for years and years. And you can see it's got bookmarks in it. And there's a great line from Churchill, who says that an educated man should use a dictionary of quotations. I'm afraid I've used a dictionary of quotations to pretend to be educated since I was being educated, since I was a schoolboy, and I actually had this edition when I was at Eton. So it's a standby that I've used for decades. It helps with speeches, it helps with articles, but it also helps educate, because sometimes you look at a quotation and then you want to find out the context. Where did it come from? What else was being said? Are there any other parts of the text that may be useful or informative? So it helps self-educate, as well as, I'm afraid, I confess to this, being a cheat to appear more educated than in truth I may be. Now, after the hard work of the Dictionary of Quotations, you must have some fun. And my literary fun is always really with P.G. Wodehouse. I love the beauty of Wodehouse's language, the similes and the metaphors that he came up with. The write-on was a tubby little chap who looked as if he'd been poured into his suit and forgot to say when, is one that comes to mind. I may be a write-on, but I'm not quite that tubby yet. And of my favourites, this is a great book, The World of Psmith. Psmith is one of Wodehouse's greatest characters. He is the one character that Wodehouse himself said had come to him ready-made, that he had heard about somebody called D'Oyly Carte, who went round wearing a monocle, and Wodehouse modelled Psmith upon him. And Psmith is a man who gets things done, who has strong opinions, who is very capable and funny and amiable, and a great friend to those who need his friendship, but also a fierce opponent of those who deserve his opposition. And 2 of my favourites are in here, but I'm only going to talk about one, and that is Leave It to Smith. Leave It to Smith is the last Smith story when Smith turns up at Blandings Castle, and the scene when Baxter is looking through the flower pots for a diamond necklace and throwing them about, waking up Lord Emsworth. If I remember rightly, Baxter is wearing lemon pyjamas. It is the sense of the absurd, the beautiful language, the sheer fun of it. I can read and reread P.G. Wodehouse again and again, and I strongly recommend Smith. Slightly more obscure than the Blandings or the Jeeves series, but well worth trying, and Leave It to Smith is my top recommendation. Becoming more serious again, and the rest of my recommendations are going to be serious, this is a book that has influenced my political thinking very greatly. I can't remember when I first heard about Sir John Fortescue, the 15th century political thinker, administrator, advisor to Henry VI, even more so to Henry VI's son, the Prince of Wales, and then ultimately to Edward IV, who forgave him for being on the wrong side in the Wars of the Roses. His wonderful book, The Difference Between Absolute and Limited Monarchy, as it more particularly regards the English Constitution. This book explains why the English, subsequently British Constitution works, what the difference is between our Constitution and the French Constitution, and actually the difference between our Constitution and the EU Constitution. In time for the referendum, it was a very good explanation of why we weren't right for the European Union, because we had a different constitution and system that was lost in the mists of time. It wasn't a new change, it was we had always been different. And even more importantly, that our economic prosperity comes from our constitution. I used to be an emerging markets investor, and people very rarely focused on the politics of emerging markets. They looked at the raw economics. I think the long-term success of emerging markets depends on good constitutions. And the thing that convinced me about that more than anything was this wonderful book by Fortescue. And interestingly, this is a first edition. And let me just see, when was it published? It was published in 1714, by which time Fortescue had been dead for hundreds of years. It was only a manuscript up until this time. It's a rather secret book, an undiscovered book, one that people didn't notice until much, much later. But it is fundamentally important to understanding how our Constitution works. So this is book number 3 in my list. And I'm remaining serious, and perhaps a plug for my late father, who was a huge influence on all my political and economic thinking. But he wrote a book on the crisis of world inflation, published in 1974. And I read it when I was a teenager. And the importance of it to me was that I understood the problem of fiat currencies. All fiat currencies in all time in history have failed, and they fail because of inflation, and they fail because governments print too much of them. Governments printed masses in 2008-9, masses more during COVID, and then, of course, we got inflation. And this is really important to understanding of basic economics. Governments will debauch the currency, and therefore you want to look at other real investments. Think of Fisher's famous equation, MV equals PT, which explains how inflation comes about. So money by velocity equals prices by transactions. If you increase the money supply, either velocity has to decline or transactions have to go up. Or the easiest, of course, is that prices go up to absorb the money that is in the system. And it's just too tempting for governments. Doesn't matter whether they are democratic or autocratic. It's too tempting for them just to produce a bit more. It's easier than taxation. Inflation ultimately is hidden taxation. It is the state taking your money by stealth. And this little book by my father, The Crisis of World Inflation, has been a great influence on me. And I think it's well worth reading. I don't know if any copies are available nowadays. I have a few, so I can't send you one. I haven't got any spare, I'm sorry to say. And then finally, a book I would recommend to everybody. It's definitely still available, and it's Tom Holland's Dominion. I loved reading this book. I'm not sure about Tom Holland's religious faith. I don't know what it is, and I can't remember if he makes it clear in the book or not. But it explains so clearly how the society we live in is determined by Christianity, how we value each other, the understanding we have of each other, the need for supporting and helping the welfare state, even the NHS, all comes from a Christian belief. And this isn't Christian socialism at all. It is that we love our neighbour, or at least we try to. We may not always succeed, but that we have an empathy for our neighbour and we feel a responsibility in a way that would have astonished the ancient Roman. They didn't understand, it didn't occur to them that people who were poor or were slaves deserved consideration because they're basically poor or slaves because it was their own fault. Christ changed all of that, and how we are governed today is fundamentally Christian. So for those of you who have a Christian faith, this book's extraordinarily reassuring. For those of you who don't, I'd suggest read it and see how much modern society owes to the teaching of Christ and to his church. It's a really wonderful book, and I would strongly recommend it to anyone who views this video, along with my father's book on world inflation, on Fortescue, on the English Constitution, the one and only P.G. Wodehouse, and of course, my great crib, the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. Thank you very much for watching. And if you're interested, do let me know, because I'll happily do this again. And if you're not interested, I won't. It's up to you. Thank you so much.